So why is no one talking about Varus? This question has been asked in the comments of my last video, and indeed I think we should be talking about Varus. Varus is unironically a sleeper OP pick right now, having one of the highest damage outputs in the game in terms of both burst damage and raw DPS. The champion is absolutely incredible right now, and especially in today's solo queue environment, the unique qualities Varus brings to the table are more important than ever. Challenger ADC mains over in Korea have noticed this too, so let's now have a look at how they are making use of Varus's newfound potential. But first, what is that secret strength exactly? Well, you know, ever since Riot introduced the option to swap pick positions in Champ Select, something very interesting happened. The change was obviously welcomed by top lane and mid lane players because these lanes largely depend on counter picks. As a consequence, the solo laners nowadays trade down to last pick, which means the ADC and support typically have to go first pick since counter picks barely matter here. However, we ADC mains lost something quite valuable in the process. We can no longer adapt to the team composition, which means if our allies just pick full AD, we cannot fix it. Or if we picked a team fighting ADC, but our allies went for a sieging and split pushing comp, we're out of luck too. But not Varus. Varus's big strength is his enormous build flexibility, and this allows Varus players to still adapt on the fly despite having first pick. And these are the 3 top tier builds Korean players are using to fix their team comp. Well, actually not every team comp needs fixing, so in many cases you can simply play what works best for you and matches your style. But in any case, here we go. The first build I want to talk about is a highly attack speed focused Ginzo's Rageblade build. The now mythic tier Rageblade synergizes with every last aspect of Varus's kit, down to his unique damage split between physical and magic damage, thus opening up tons of options for the champion. In general, the ADC item update had been very favorable for these hybrid-type marksmen, and Rageblade is obviously a huge contributing factor here. Varus has huge synergies with ramping attack speed effects due to his great innate attack speed scalings, as well as his passive of course. The combination of Varus's passive, Rageblade, and the rune Lethal Tempo boosts your consistent damage to absolutely ridiculous levels, as all of these effects feed off each other. But the best thing here is that literally none of the stats on Rageblade are wasted on Varus, while at the same time getting massive value out of Rageblade's unique passive effects. Due to that, the item is actually at the core of 2 distinct Varus builds that each have their own strengths depending on the matchup, but more on that later. We first want to have a look at the more classic marksman approach, combining Rageblade with additional crit items, as this will be your most straightforward and consistent build overall. The rune page is Lethal Tempo, Triumph, Legend Alacrity, and Coup de Grace, with Taste of Blood and Treasure Hunter secondary. Lethal Tempo needs no further introduction here. Varus goes absolutely crazy with this in extended fights, and the wildest interaction is for sure with his passive. Mind you, Varus's passive gives you bonus attack speed that scales with the bonus attack speed you already have, essentially creating a positive feedback loop. The only thing holding you back here is the natural attack speed cap of 2.5 attacks per second, but Lethal Tempo removes that as well when fully stacked. Not even the biggest tanks can withstand your barrage for long at this point. You will notice though that all your other runes, except for Treasure Hunter, are heavily early game focused, despite the fact that your underlying goal is to scale into the late game. Or actually, the correct way of putting this would be, it is because your goal is to scale into the late game. Varus can carry late game teamfights simply with the power and synergy of his item build, and additional late game runes are not needed here. But unlike other hyper carries, Varus's early game is far from being weak. In fact, Varus comes with huge early game burst, making for an excellent punish game, and also with above average attack range, allowing you to dictate the pace in most lanes. Couple that with the power from your early game runes, and you will have a lot of agency starting from level 1 despite playing a late game hyper carry. Please keep in mind that your itemization is very flexible no matter which build you play, making it a huge part of your skill expression as a Varus player. However, a typical full item build with this Varus playstyle might look something like this. After rushing Berserker's Greaves for an additional early power spike, you go Rageblade and Hurricane, already sporting a deadly presence in larger skirmishes. Your goal then is to stay alive long enough to actually reap the benefits of your scaling damage, so the semi-defensive late-game items of Shield Bow, Wit's End, and Guardian Angel will always be good. I will argue that this way of playing Varus is by far the easiest, since all you really need is some positional awareness. Even if you miss all your skill shots, yes, even if you miss your ultimate, which is your best team fighting tool in general, you can still hard carry with just the damage from your auto attacks. The enemy just crumbles under your onslaught no matter what, so as long as you don't put yourself out of position, there's little they can do to stop you. But let's now talk about the second Varus build you need to know about, since it goes hand in hand with the build you've just seen. And by the way, keep in mind that if you want to have educational league content like this in your personal feed, all you need to do is click the subscribe button. So the next build actually uses the exact same rune page, and for the exact same reasons. It is also very similar in style, but a little harder to play since a lot more power will be in your spells. This in turn, however, makes the build more explosive and more difficult for the enemy to react to. But the true beauty of this build is that it starts the exact same way as the previous one, with Berserker's Greaves into Rageblade. This gives you the unique advantage of choosing and adapting your style during the game if you have to. The build puts heavy emphasis on the magic damage in Varus' kit, so your opponent's itemization to counter you is now vastly different from the aforementioned crit item approach. If, for example, your mid laner is your only source of magic damage but goes 0-5 in lane, you can spontaneously pivot from crit into this build at no cost, so the enemy cannot just stack armor to counter your entire team. With your Lethal Tempo rune page, Rageblade and Gnash's Tooth, you still have plenty of DPS with your auto attacks, but the addition of full power late game mage items adds a lot of unexpected burst to your champion. With all this ability power, your ultimate is an actual nuke, and your blight stacks have the potential to actually one-shot tanks due to their scaling percent HP damage. And while this build notably lacks lifesteal, you now have access to the single best defensive item in the game, Zhonya's Hourglass. In some matchups, the stasis is just invaluable. However, there is also an entirely different approach to playing Varus. In my opinion, this third build I will show you is also the hardest to play with the smallest margin for error, so be warned, but the build works extremely well under the right circumstances. It focuses heavily on Varus' spells with massive poke damage and huge sieging potential. Your rune page reflects that, of course, as you go for Arcane Comet, Manifold Band, Transcendence and Scorch, with Magical Footwear and Biscuit Delivery secondary. Arcane Comet adds valuable poke damage to your spells, which is especially relevant in the early game. On the same note, you also want Scorch for the exact same reason. By relying on your spell damage, you now outrange even the safest of enemy bot laners, ultimately forcing them out of lane over and over if you are playing well. This approach is naturally very mana hungry, which is the reason you need both Manifold Band and also Biscuit Delivery. On top of that, you buy a Tear of the Goddess on your first base to further help with mana issues. However, as soon as you upgrade it after getting your mythic item Ghostblade, you turn all that mana into extra damage as well, making for an amazing mid-game power spike. Especially while sieging, Varus can deal a lot of damage with his hit and run style. The Lethality poke build is definitely the most flexible in terms of individual item choices. Even your mythic item Ghostblade is negotiable, since Duskblade works very well too. For your late game build, the only item that is truly necessary is Cyrilda's Grudge, but after that you have to carefully evaluate which effects would benefit you in your game the most. Situational items such as Maw, GA, Edge of Night or Serpent's Fang are all good in their own rights, and the burden of picking the correct option is always on you. I personally like the Rageblade builds a little better, but what do you think? Also, speaking of Rageblade, another marksman who just goes crazy with the item is Kog'Maw, so I highly recommend you check out the video on your screen as well.